Strong Opinions Weekly Held is a framework for thinking. It's a framework for coming up very fast with decision making under uncertainty. The original post was written by Amit Ranadiv, and you are encouraged to go ahead and read it. But if you don't have enough time, I will summarize it for you. So, we are all faced as software developers, and this specific episode is not about software development but about a framework for thinking and for coming up with critical decisions under uncertainty, which is a very important aspect of software development. So I decided it deserves its own episode. We're all faced with making decisions under uncertainty. I don't need to tell you that this is the business we're in as software engineers. This is especially difficult, especially if you are trying to understand something which is based on the external environment which you don't have control over. For example, you have external teams or you have external deliveries which you're expecting, or even what you're doing is a very first development, a very first iteration of a project. You are not fully aware of all the things that can go wrong. You are not fully aware of how will it behave under load. You are not fully aware whether the direction you are taking is the right direction. For example, when you make an API, you are surely not aware of everything. Or when you are trying to research a problem, if you have a problem like, for example, you see a problem in latency in your server, how do you approach it? You don't have all the details, but you are trying to figure out the details. So, or in a different aspect like economics or market growth trends or customer needs or competitive reactions, it's very difficult to take this decision, especially under uncertainty. And this framework is all about helping you making external decisions that are very difficult to take because it involves external inputs which you are practically don't have right now. And on top of all this, you need to get these decisions very quickly. So this framework will provide you with the means to come up with a decision very quickly and then refactor it. It's like getting out a prototype. You get out it's fast, like one day, and then you refactor and tune it. So, what is the strong opinions weekly held process? It's about making decisions with incomplete information. What are the steps to have the strong opinions weekly held process? The steps are this. I have decomposed it into three steps. In step one, you develop a tentative hypothesis. Um, in this step, you simply come up with the fastest thing. You use your instincts to come up with a solution. Let's say a client tells you, you know, all these tools for mind mapping, they're great, but I'm looking for something which will be more helpful because the standard thinking is not hierarchical. It's more like a graph which connects some nodes to others. And he wants you to come up with a solution. So in step one, we come up with the fastest solution that you can, hopefully in one day. Of course, you gather the data, of course, you look at things, but the main thing is to come up with something, although it may be wrong. This is step one, come up with a hypothesis. Step two, do whatever you can to contradict it. This may include talking to friends, talking to peers, trying to contradict it, do research on the area, do the deductive, do the five whys question analysis, try to find root cause analysis, do your statistics, do your research, develop a decision tree or issue tree. You do everything that you can in order to contradict the first hypothesis that you come up with. And once you have contradicted it, you can refactor or tune that hypothesis further on. However, we called it strong opinions weakly held. So it's a strong opinion. Once you have a hypothesis, you are sticking to it. This is your current hypothesis. So if someone asks you, what do you think right now about the topic, you tell it about the current strong opinion that you have. In the third phase, so in the first phase, we developed a tentative hypothesis. In the second phase, we have developed a way to contradict it. And in the third step, we change and tune the hypothesis. And it's very similar to coming up with a prototype and then you refactor and tune it until you come up with something which is good, answering the customer expectations. But all over this way, you always have something, you always have a prototype. So in this general example, you always have a hypothesis that you stick with. This is the strong part, but the weakly held is that you are trying to contradict it. So, because we are sticking with something that is incorrect and we are refactoring it, and we are not putting a lot of emphasis into finding first the correct thing. We are finding something and then trying to contradict it. Then we use a lot our intuition in order to guide us to a conclusion, no matter how imperfect our hypothesis is. And the key to develop a strong opinion quickly, very quick, one day, half a day, is that you remember that you don't need to be correct. If you are not correct and you continue to refactor it and you continue to contradict it, you may find that this lane of thinking, this way of thinking and coming up with a hypothesis is much better. It's much better actually than first doing all the data analysis, first coming up with all the data, first coming up with all the statistics, and then coming up with a conclusion. This is a different way. You first come with a conclusion, with a hypothesis, and then you try to contradict it. The weakly held is you trying to prove yourself wrong. This may be helpful in multiple ways. For example, if you're in a meeting and you are doing some design review, then trying to prove yourself wrong would mean that most of the questions that people will ask you and try to prove yourself wrong, you have already asked yourself. This is very similar to McKinsey Day One hypothesis. In McKinsey, then in the beginning of any new McKinsey client engagement, you are expected to develop a day one hypothesis. This is based on high level facts that you have learned within the first 24 hours of the project. You are actually forced to develop an early hypothesis of what the solution to the client problem is. So, and once you do this, then you try to contradict it, and then you go through the process of refactoring and tuning your hypothesis, and you come up with a bulletproof. If the client asks you on day 3, what do you think, you give it your current hypothesis and you stick to it. But for yourself, until you have the deadline, you try to contradict and you refactor it. Good things out of this is that you are trying to overcome all the biases, because if you have done your research like step 1, step 2, step 3 in a standard research phase, then you may have, without noticing, inserting some biases into the hypothesis and testing. But in this way, you are already telling yourself to contradict yourself, so you are ignoring your biases. And another benefit of it is that you have an already existing on demand decision, which means anytime someone comes to you and tries to ask you what is your current hypothesis, you already have something. So to repeat, the strong opinion is weakly held. A framework of thinking means that you have strong opinions, weakly held process. What does this mean? You hold strong to your opinion and you weakly try to contradict it. Very strongly you try to contradict it, which means that this opinion is weak. And it's a process. In step 1, you develop a tentative hypothesis. In step 2, you do whatever you can to contradict it. In step 3, you change and tune the hypothesis, and then you go back to step 2. You try to contradict it and then you move on. And this was a brief introduction to the strong opinions weakly held process. I tried it myself. It works Excellent. And this was based on, as I said, Amit Ranadiv blog post on Medium. If you want, just search for it on Medium. I will leave more details in the description. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.